Marks. My name is Josie Jordan. I'm a parishioner here, but I'm also part of the group from St. Mark's that works with the Washington Interfaith Network. When and I can speak to you briefly about our participation in WIN, because like Isaiah, WIN provides the community organizing structure and expertise that allows over 40 faith institutions in Washington, D.C. to work together on community issues. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what that means to us as a church, and a little bit about how I see that in the community. First, I want to say I love Isaiah's motto, building a just and abundant Minnesota through faith in action. I just love it. A just and abundant DC is the vision we have for our city as well. And being part of WIN enables St. Mark's to influence corporate leaders, political leaders, to make choices that align with justice and abundance for all DC citizens. So St. Mark's has actively worked with WIN for 5 years, and we've been involved in many actions. I offer 2 brief examples related to safe and affordable housing, because in DC that is a huge issue. So St. Mark's members did research on developers interested in bidding on a very large project down by the Anacostia River. When the plans were presented, number one, WIN was at the table. Yay. And number 2, the research that our parishioners did provided the basis for WIN to request that the developers go back to the drawing board and come back with plans with more affordable housing. And they did. A second example was just this past spring. St. Mark's spearheaded the first of several ward meetings with individual DC council members to express WIN's response to this year's proposed DC budget. As a result, the budget was reworked to reflect many of WIN's requests. So I also want to tell you a little bit about how working with WIN allows us to live out our mission as a church and as individuals. So one of the unique opportunities WIN offers our community is by empowering us to put our faith in action at the systemic level. We do many, many activities connected with social justice and compassionate efforts, and they're all very important. WIN, however, gives us a path to follow that leads to systemic change. I believe it empowers us to live out our call to create beloved community. And finally, beyond the many actions, beyond the efforts towards specific goals, I believe the WIN model combats racism and fosters racial justice in our city. And I'll tell you why. Part of WIN's methodology is to have individuals tell their stories and share their values one-on-one across churches, across synagogues, across mosques. In these conversations, people experience the amazing opportunity to hear and be heard across race, class, age, and religion. When I engage in these conversations, difference melts away. Common hope emerges, and the possibility of creating a more just and abundant DC becomes real. So I welcome you, and I thank you for engaging in this work. It is very vital.
People, that warm welcome. Thanks to everybody for joining us here in DC, and for those of you on Zoom. We have a special guest here, so without any delay, by the way, I'm Dorian Warren, co-president. I really want to introduce Doran Schrantz, the best organizer in the country, who is executive director of Isaiah, to introduce our special guest.
Warren, I'm honored to introduce Senator Tina Smith, one of our great senators from the state of Minnesota, who has served in the U.S. Senate since 2017. She's won back-to-back election victories, securing her first 6-year term in November of 2020, and she has been a fighter at the national and at the state level for years and years and years for progressive issues and for racial and economic justice. And I will introduce her right now. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you. I am, as you can see, I am so excited to be here. So I want to tell you a story about how grassroots power changed Minnesota and has the same power to change the country and change the world. We are here today because we know that the power of this great democracy comes from the people of this great democracy. It lives in the communities and the neighborhoods and in the people who make this amazing country home. Now, there's a lot of people out there that will try to tell us that the power actually lives in the big boardrooms. It lives in the places where the rich people are. But we know differently. And the story of what happened in Minnesota is a story about the long work of many years of people working in coalition, faith communities, labor communities, immigrant rights communities, people everywhere in Minnesota, rural communities, farm communities, coming together to say, we are going to use our voices to make Minnesota be the state that we want it to be. Now, this didn't just happen in one short, sweet legislative session in Minnesota in the winter and spring of 2023. It's been happening over decades, right? Because we know that the path of progress is not a straight line. It's not inexorably bending forward. As Dr. King said, it bends forward because of the tireless effort of individuals that never give up. And that's what we're looking at right here. For years, people have been working to build support and a coalition for the accomplishments of the Minnesota legislature and Governor Walz and Peggy Flanagan this last legislative session. They were organizing at the grassroots to help people understand why it mattered that immigrants could have access to a driver's license, even if they didn't have citizenship. They were organizing to help people understand the importance, the power of people having the freedom to decide for themselves about their own reproductive lives, not some politician in some legislative room in St. Paul or Washington, D.C. They were organizing to talk about the value of healthcare as a fundamental human right, not something that you should just have because you had the resources to buy it. They were organizing around the power of people being able to organize, be able to come together to negotiate and work collectively to improve their working conditions, their life, their wages, their healthcare, their retirement. All of that work happened for decades. And then here's what happened in the fall of 2022 in Minnesota. Candidates up and down the ballot, from school board to governor, went out and campaigned on these values. And they told Minnesotans, if you elect us, if you give us the power, we are going to be fighting for you in the state capitol. And we're not going to sit around and talk about this anymore. We're going to do it. And lo and behold, they won. They won because they told Minnesotans what they were going to do. And then Minnesota said, yes, please do that. Show us that government can work for us. And that's what happened. And what I love about this story is that these leaders didn't sit there with the power that they had been given by their citizens. They didn't sit there and say, oh, we should be careful. We should be cautious. We don't want to overreach. We don't want to go too far. They knew that behind them were millions of Minnesotans that wanted them to take action. And that is what they did. That is the story that you are hearing today. And does that not give you hope for our democracy?
Yes.
Like, we have the power when we act on that grassroots vision that our beloved Paul Wellstone talked about. The politics is for improving people's lives, and that we all do better when we all do better when we act on that. We can literally change the world. That is why I am so proud to be here to support these leaders, but also to support the thousands and thousands and thousands of grassroots leaders that actually did the work, that went door to door, that talked on the phones, that talked to their neighbors in the grocery stores, even if their neighbors were really sure they wanted to talk to them. And they built the coalition to make the change, to show that we can deliver for people and make this government work for everyone. I'm so proud of this work. I'm proud to have been a part of it. Back in the day when some of the things like driver's licenses for all, like, we failed at, we didn't get it done. But we got it done now because we never gave up. Thank you all so much for listening to this story. And that story and the success is here to go out and continue the organizing that we have to keep on doing to make sure that this country lives up to its promise. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, so much. And I want to just, while we're waiting for some other guest speakers, set the context a little bit to what we're going to be talking about today. So in 2022, Minnesota, as a state, unexpectedly won a narrow Democratic trifecta, thanks to voters who were demanding action on reproductive rights, on climate change, paid leave, and of course, democracy. And although the timing of this trifecta was a surprise to lots of folks, probably not to the folks sitting up here, a group of legislators and people-powered organizations have been preparing for this moment for 5 years. They developed a shared progressive agenda based on their conversations with Minnesotans across the state. Am I saying that right? I'm a Midwesterner, but you know, they built a robust inside-outside table committed to making that collective vision a reality. And with their C4 affiliations, they drove the voter turnout that led to these electoral victories. Second, I have to say, many of us have seen the US Census numbers on the adjusted poverty measure that came out just on Tuesday, and we know what the top line is. And if you're not infuriated, you should be. 138% increase in child poverty in 1 year. From 2021 to 2022, the child poverty rate doubled. This very devastating, infuriating news is a direct and predictable result of the policy choices of our elected officials in this country. As a country, we performed an experiment that social scientists, frankly, would have considered unethical. We first used policies like the child tax credit to pull millions of children out of poverty. We brought Black, Latino, and Native child poverty to record lows. And then we decided to let these policies expire. So in a federal situation where Congress has refused to extend the kind of family supporting and literally life-giving policies that our kids need, much less expand on the immigrant children and families. But we also here today have a counterpoint. We have Minnesota, a state that passed a wish list of progressive policies, including a state child tax credit that includes undocumented immigrants, massive funding for childcare, universal free school meals, paid family leave. The list is actually very, very long. They did it with a one-seat majority in the Minnesota Senate. They did it in a state that's, you could argue, not necessarily a progressive state. I'm old enough to remember Jesse the Body Ventura as governor. And let's not forget Michelle Bachmann was in that state. So the question we're going to ask and answer today is, why such a different outcome in Minnesota? And the answer is pretty simple, and you'll hear from my colleagues about this. It's power from the ground up. As a labor leader and civil rights organizer, A. Philip Randolph put it this way: at the banquet table of nature, there are no reserved seats. You get what you can take, and you take what you can hold. You can't take anything without organization. Community Change Action works with incredible partners across the country, like Isaiah in Unidos, Minnesota, to build power from the ground up. We like to say we fuse power of organizing ideas and politics to realize the promise of a multiracial democracy where all families can flourish. And that's exactly what Isaiah and their community and labor partners and inside allies did in Minnesota. So I'll say this, and then we're going to get into our conversation. At a time when insurrectionists and would-be authoritarians are threatening the future of our democracy, the work in Minnesota shows that democracy can deliver for our families, and it shows what multiracial democracy looks like in practice. So, while we're waiting for some other guests, I actually want to introduce our brilliant organizers from Minnesota. Leah Montgomery is joining us from Minnesota this morning. Leah is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and Legislative Affairs in the Waltz administration. Bernie Burnham is the president of the Minnesota AFL-CIO. She spent her career as a teacher and served as president of the Duluth Federation of Teachers and the Minnesota State Teachers Union, Education Minnesota, and president. I'm the son of a proud Teachers Union member, so thank you for your service. Emilia Gonzalez Avalos is executive director of Unidos, Minnesota. Unidos, Minnesota is a grassroots organization born from the Dreamer movement that builds power with Minnesota's working families to advance social, racial, and economic justice. They're also part of the fair immigration reform movement, which Community Change housed and supported for 20 years, and it's good to be with you again. And so for the next 30 minutes or so, we are going to have some interruptions from some friends on the Hill at some point. And when we do, we'll take applause, colleagues, to talk to ourselves. But I actually want to start with you and Leah. Governor Waltz's overarching frame was, quote, make Minnesota the best state to raise a family. And it was attached to an incredibly ambitious agenda: paid leave, child tax credit, universal free lunch, significant increases in the budget for childcare, a new department for children and families, and the list goes on. So, talk to us about how you developed that agenda and built support for that agenda. And actually, I'm going to pause, Leah. Thank you for bearing with me and playing some improv here, because we do have a friend, the one, the only Representative Rashida Tlaib, who is with us. And we want to say good morning to her and give her the mic before we come to our Minnesota question.
Okay.
So, Representative Tlaib.
Sorry if I'm out of breath, I decided to walk here. So thank you all so much for being here. I'm here to support my Midwestern partners, but just know that we also have a success story in Michigan, and the incredible work that Governor Whitmer has done on childcare, about $1.4 billion investment. So we're excited about that, but I want to really thank Community Change Action. As you all know, we're looming at the end of this month with the American Rescue dollars expiring for our child care providers. But you guys know I'm a proud mama, proud daughter of two incredible boys, as Ilhan has bared the nickname that has stuck as Mama Bear. She actually gave me a bracelet that said Mama Bear. Now I was like, you know what, I'm gonna take that, I'm gonna own it. But I really recognize the incredible daily issues. I know I'm blessed, but you know, I try to stay rooted in community by talking to our mothers on the ground. And it's interesting, as they tell their stories, I think of flashbacks of the playpen that I put behind my desk at my office at a nonprofit, and how I remember like backing up the my chair into the playpen all the time with my son Adam. And I even remember at that time, we didn't have Zoom, y'all. We didn't have Zoom. We had these massive calls with 150 folks. You had to press star, I think 6 or something like that. And then you were on the schedule to speak maybe, or you were going to ask a question. As soon as you unmuted yourself, the child would cry. I mean, that Adam would just start just crying. And so it's interesting, it's different. Now with Zoom, I have more
Yusuf, my 12-year-old, just talking to Zoom by like coming in and hugging me. He didn't care if I was, I was like, Adam at least now goes, "Are you on camera, mom?" And like, no, because rarely does Adam want to hug me these days. Because now an 18-year-old, but we know that people are struggling. You all were the choir. I think the incredible stories that have been coming out it's been tremendous. But what I know in Michigan, it's similar to Minnesota, but in Michigan, we were able to get bipartisan support for childcare, which is rarely talked about. But I mean, in a way that I think is profound. They weren't always all for every single measure, but the significant investment of 1.4 billion was interesting. But I want to applaud. I don't know if you all saw my tweet, because when the Minnesota state legislature like just hit the ground running the first 6 months, I think I tagged the Michigan legislature. It was like with the eyes, it's like just like hints. But they did not waver in the speed that they were moving. Not only were Minnesota legislature was able to pass paid, so much more, like from paid leave to medical leave, child tax credit, replacing lead pipes, universal school meals, which we did do as well, and so much more. I mean, the trifecta in Minnesota has demonstrated what it means to legislate for those with the greatest need, but also the fact that you can move with urgency. People always want to be so calculated, so strategic, and waiting. And like in Michigan right now, we're still fighting for driver's license for all, and I cannot believe 10 years later, we fought, and they said to us, I come from a very diverse community in Southwest. They said to us, just help us get in the majority, and we got your back. And now that they're there, they're letting people down. And they know I'm very vocal about it. Ethics doesn't let me go down there to testify and speak out, as Ilhan will tell you, we're not allowed to do that. But we can educate people on the impact of doing nothing in regards to those access. But since being elected to Congress, I've been a fierce advocate, as you know, being the eldest of 14. I know what it takes to take care of family and people. I'm the third parent in many ways, and taking care of people all my life. But I want you to know, we created a Congressional Mamas Caucus, and I would love community change, and all of you, so please use that as a tool. And the Congressional Mamas Caucus is about the fact that we're kind of tired as moms that you all, people have policies about moms, but not with moms. And so we're changing that. And I really appreciate the incredible advocacy of Mother and Justice that's housed in Michigan, the national organization that has been just championing paid leave when I was in the state house. So we've come a long way. And we also started Get the Let Out Caucus. And again, that one, we started in a bipartisan way. I tell all my colleagues, not one congressional district, not one doesn't have lead pipes. And, I always say to the president, you can't build back better if we're poisoning children. So again, I cannot express my appreciation to all of you. I just want you to know, it's not just Ilhan and I and so many of my caucus members. We're not giving up on Universal Schools Meals Program, as we're not giving up on Medicare for all and reinstating child tax credit. But what you all do is you show up here in this space and unapologetic, which I appreciate, when a lot of my moms and a lot of our folks back home, parents and caregivers can't be here. They're busy. And so when you all bring their stories, I always say to my team, we gotta always bring the district with us in everything that we do, because sometimes they can't be in this room. And if you're a good organizer and advocate, that's one rule you always remember, bring them with you. I don't care if it's, bring that person's name into the room, make people understand the importance of that. And so again, thank you so much for the incredible work. Transformative change, I've seen, if it's Civil Rights Act to voting rights, to being able to organize unions in the workplace. I say this all the time, it really came from the streets end. When local communities and states and others were able to do it, it transcended. I see with the LGBTQ movement and everything. It's when local communities start rising up and doing it in their own backyard. It eventually comes to the halls of Congress. So understand and believe in that, because that kind of work, again, is like that seed that we want to grow that garden. You are planting those seeds. So thank you all so much. And again, you're so lucky, sis. I'm getting there, but she does rub it in too much. As being the first 2 Muslim women ever elected, we didn't run to be first in anything. I always simply remind people we fought because of our lived experiences. And but it's interesting. we're from the Midwest, and keep
Yes.
reminding people,
Yes.
yo, we're from the Midwest, elected to Muslims. And Muslims that literally, like, every little stereotype about Muslim women, I think we torn down every single one. No, literally, like, it just every single one, they're like, oh my God, yeah, well, whatever little stereotype, racist little things that you're thinking about in your head is wiped out. But of course, they're replacing it with other bizarre crap.
Comparable, Representative Ilhan Omar, who was an organizer in communities in Minnesota for years and years before she became a household name across the country. And I'm so proud to introduce Representative Ilhan Omar.
Thank you, Doran.
I know, I'm feeling bad, like, listen to you.
Please give up for Rashida Tlaib. And it is true, I do call her Mama Bear, because, you know, she exemplifies what it means to be a mom, to show up, to care not only for yours, but everyone else's, and the communities in which Rashida and I grew up in. It is about the village. It's about lifting each other up. It's about protecting one another. It's about standing up for what is right. And Rashida does that every single day, regardless of what people have to say. But as a Minnesotan, I'm incredibly proud to be here, and it is true, I do rub it in for other folks who do have trifectas, like my colleagues who come from Michigan and New York and other places, that Minnesota is doing something incredible. And I want to thank, you know, my former colleague, Liz, who I had the honor of getting elected with. We were freshmen together in the Minnesota House, and now she's doing incredible leadership as chair. You know, Doran does really incredible work in organizing Bernie with the union movement. We're so glad to have your leadership. Dorian, thank you so much for everything that you do. And you know, we talk a lot about the immigrant movement in Minnesota and the ways in which we stand out in the nation. And Amelia and others that organize with her is the reason that that's happening. I have a model that I use. They say you get what you organize for. And truly that is what's happening in Minnesota. For 10 years, we organized for a trifecta. We walked around telling people that we were going to do paid sick and safe time. We told people that we were going to get universal school meals passed in Minnesota. We told people that we were going to invest in our communities. We told people that we were going to take care of our immigrant communities and those that were vulnerable. And lo and behold, we did get that trifecta. And it was community, it was organizers, it was everybody who made sure that trifecta was possible, that organized with love, that said, you made all of these promises. Now it's time for you to act. And oh my God, with the Minnesota legislators, I watched with amazement, maybe with some jealousy, because a lot of, as Liz knows, a lot of the policies that they ended up passing were things that we introduced when we were freshmen in 2017. And people told us that we were ridiculous for thinking that it was possible in Minnesota to get these policies done. And I remember, you know, just sitting there. My chief was my policy aide when I was in the Minnesota House, and I was like, oh my God, they're passing school meals. This is ridiculous. Like, they're expanding childcare in Minnesota. They're doing pre-K. They're doing driver license for undocumented. They're taking care of our union brothers and sisters. They're doing all of the things that people said was never going to be possible. And they're doing it so fast. What are they going to do the next session? And it was just like, it's like, it was so amazing to watch because the Minnesota legislature is part-time.
Yeah.
They're, in session for a few months in the first year, in session for a few months in the next year. And, to see them work so fast, so diligently, and do such amazing policy work was so incredible, knowing that in Congress, nothing moves for months and months. And to know that our governor had their back and was willing to sign the pieces of legislature that they were passing, and with the slim majorities. And I have to tell you, there was a good friend of mine who's a Republican senator in the Minnesota Senate. And he was recently, Liz probably has seen this video, but it went viral. And he was talking about 30-some-year-olds in the Minnesota House and Senate that were very adamant. And he said, because in the Senate, I think they have one, is it one? It's one, yeah. And he mentioned one senator that he thought would be like the mansion of the Minnesota legislature. He said, he didn't stop any of it. Not mansion, we're Minnesotans, we take care of one another. 30-some-year-olds getting shit done. It's about time. It is that, we always talk about reflective representation. And reflective representation means that you elect people that are a reflection of the community. So when you elect 30-year-olds, you get mothers who are very adamant about making changes to make the lives of mothers easy. You get mothers who care about children and the future that they are going to inherit. This is why you had massive legislation in regards to protecting our environment and dealing with environmental injustice. When you elect union members, you get massive movements in protecting our workers. When you elect immigrants or first-generation immigrants, you get legislation like driver license for all. And when you elect people who are actually a reflection of all of the things that have been wrong in this country, you get people who are very adamant about getting it right. And I am so proud, not only to be from Minnesota, but to be part of that reflection in our democracy, to represent people who are living in the margins, to move the needle for a better tomorrow. But I'm also incredibly proud of my former colleagues and the representatives who represent me in the Minnesota House and Senate, our governor and our lieutenant, and just really incredible organizers all around. So thank you all for listening. Miracle 2.0. Celebrating our work and lifting it up so that other people not just celebrate that, but also feel the urgency to make the drastic changes that their communities are desperate for. And maybe Congress will also follow suit. So thank you all.
You want to give us Representative Omar one more time? Yes, so Leah, I know you're on Zoom waiting. I jumped the gun because there are two other people who are very special I need to introduce. And we've been teasing all morning the story of the Minnesota Miracles. We're about to take a deep dive into what happened and how did it happen. So I actually want to bring up two folks to give us the story. Doran Schrantz, who I briefly introduced earlier, is the executive director of Isaiah. And I do really believe she's the best organizer in the country. No offense to my organizer colleagues in the. GFBC, Isaiah is a multiracial, statewide, nonpartisan coalition of faith communities, Black barbershops, childcare centers, and other community-based constituencies fighting for racial and economic justice in Minnesota. And State Representative Liz Olson, who represents District 8A in Minnesota's Iron Range, and chaired the House Ways and Means Committee in the last legislative session. She's also the co-founder of the Minnesota Values Project, which is a governing initiative designed to engage legislators, Minnesotans, and community groups in a conversation that centers the values of Minnesotans to shape the future of the state. So Doran, please come talk to us about what we need to know and understand about democratic politics in Minnesota. Or you could stay right there. Absolutely.
All right, thank you, everybody. I'm just gonna, me and Representative Olson are just gonna do a brief framing, and then we're gonna dive into the conversation with the full panel. So I have been organizing in Minnesota for 20 years. And I've been organizing in Minnesota for 20 years with many of the people who are on this panel and many others who are not here today that we're speaking for and with, and wouldn't be here without in terms of organizers. So a bunch of stuff was said and you got some overview of what happened in Minnesota, but I would like to put a finer point on it. So something politically extraordinary happened in Minnesota in the 2023 legislative session. There was a 1-vote Senate majority. What that meant is every piece of policy that passed through the House and the Senate had to get all 34 Senate votes every single time. And if any of you have ever worked in a Senate at the state legislature or here in Congress, you may have some perspective on how difficult that is. Yeah, okay. So the question becomes, and then I actually, before we dive in, I want to give a list. You've heard some of them. I'm going to give you a list just off the top of what just passed in the 2023 legislative session. And what I want you to understand is this is literally the tip of the iceberg. If you are a policy nerd, I defy you to go into omnibus bills and just take a look. Take a look at the public safety bill, take a look at the environment bill, take a look at the health and human services bill, take a look at that labor bill. And you will find the entire thing has an equity and economic justice lens across the board. Okay, but paid family and medical leave, child tax credit, universal school meals, earned sick and save time, historic investments in childcare that focus on childcare teachers and workers also. Unprecedented funding for K-12 schools, 100% clean energy by 2030, a Minnesota healthcare public option that includes undocumented immigrants, protections for reproductive freedoms, a green bank that is capitalized, coverage and benefits, I said for undocumented workers, banning conversion therapy, restoring the vote for 55,000 formerly incarcerated Minnesotans, automatic voter registration, pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds, replacing lead pipes, a warehouse worker safety bill, banning non-competes, mandatory audience meetings, a refinery safety bill, legalizing cannabis, universal background checks, including red flag laws, dedicated funding for public transit, and driver's licenses for immigrants. I love my elected leader friends, and we wouldn't be here without Governor Walz, without the extraordinary DFL caucus in the House and the extraordinary DFL Senate majority. But this did not happen simply because we elected Democrats in 2022. And the story we want to underscore is this was 10 years, it was 15 years, and it was a set of leaders inside and outside who decided after we had some experiences in a previous trifecta, which got a lot of really good things done, but left a lot on the table about what would it take for us to operate differently, engage people all across the state, both in political seasons, but even more importantly, through the governing process that built the capacity for this to happen. And we wouldn't be here if it weren't for the creation of a table called Minnesota Values Project, which allowed for inside-outside organizing and alignment that started in 2017, and our organizer, legislator, and chair of the Ways and Means Committee, Representative Liz Olson, helped found that table.
Thank you, Doran. It's great to be here, and I'm Liz Olson, state rep, and I'll do a minor correction. No one else will care except for my Minnesota people. I am Iron Range adjacent, which matters greatly to my Iron Range colleagues, that I do not define myself as that. Just in case any of them are tuned in. But I am a mom, I am an organizer, I take care of my mom who is elderly with a disability. And so this session matters greatly to me for the decades of work that it's taken to get here to really do something that is going to improve the lives of Minnesotans. And we have been laser focused on that with this group here. And it's a delight to be here and with Leah on the screen too. So just to tell you a little bit, we call it the Minnesota Miracle 2.0. This was not a miracle. I think that is like the number one thing to talk about is this, as you continue to hear, and we'll just keep beating the drumbeat, this was decades in the making. This was people coming together well before the trifecta. It wasn't to meet the moment, we had to create the moment. And that is what we did. And that took a lot of us for a lot of years before my time in the legislature. But I'll just quickly do a little bit. We've talked about the Minnesota Values Project, so I just want to define a little bit more about what that is. I've been meeting with colleagues, other legislators across the nation wanting to know about this. And so I think this is just a really important part to talk about, especially as I think as, movement people, we talk about co-governing, and I think we try to define it a lot. We just kind of did it. And so this is a little bit about that. So in 2017, I was elected at the same time that you heard that Ilhan was elected. We were in a deep minority in the House and the Senate. We had a Democratic governor. But we really used that time to think about how do we actually build for what we want to win when we have the power to win it. And so we, thanks to Speaker Melissa Fortman, who was our minority leader at the time, she said, that sounds like a great idea. Use your time in the minority to organize. And so we did. We started going across the state, and instead of having those sessions where legislators stand behind a table and tell you about everything, we actually started doing roundtables, world cafes. What keeps you up at night? What's your hopes? What's your dreams? How do you want a government that works for you? And we started to build and snowball. We started as the House caucus doing that. Then we had our friends in the Senate join us. We had our allied organizations join us, and we started to come together to form what we wanted to do, not just in a policy way, but in how we talk about the kinds of wins we want to have, how we bring people along. So we started to form this, what is now called the MVP, the Minnesota Values Project, which is really rooted in a set of values that are shared by Minnesotans across our state in every district. And so that's where we came from. And so now we're this beautiful table with these organizational partners who you're here with, that we have a really formal table where we do field work together, we do narrative work together, we set a policy agenda together. And so this has been going on work since 2017, and the House first got the majority before the Senate did. And so we've had sort of a dry run at a lot of this too, which I think is really important. I think if we would have come into a trifecta, even with all of this work around our shared agenda, being in alignment with the governor and lieutenant governor, all of those things, you still would have a lot of tension if you've not passed a lot of these bills, right? And so in the House, we had the opportunity for 4 years before the Senate got their 1-seat majority we were passing a lot of these bills and lobbying them over to the Senate. So we started to get the muscle to figure out how we do this and work through this tension. So this oftentimes would bring up tension at the MVP table. We had to dig in and learn how to trust each other. We did things even as simple as like, we did a round of one-to-ones. We spent a year doing one-to-ones with between allies and legislators and everybody and governance team to really just work on these muscles we realized we would need in order to pass this big bold agenda. And so we did that. So when the Senate came, we were just ready to lob the stuff over there and, you know, let's go. And that is what our speaker said on, I think, the first week in session. She was on a national media and she said LFG. And we did. That was our hashtag all year, was, you know, or for 4 months that we did all that in. But it was, again, I want to just like, it was a lot of work and a lot of organizing and a lot of trust with this. And this wasn't all of it. Obviously, the story is bigger than just MVP, but this was a place where we could come together, that we built that durable structure that was rooted in 1 foot in the Capitol and 1 foot out, to be able to build this work. So that's a little bit about some of the context that I think helped us to be able to both create and meet this moment that we're in.
Thank you, Doran and Representative Olson. Can you all give it up for them, please? Hey, Lee, are you ready? Now, I'd like to come to you and ask you a question, really about agenda setting. So we know that Governor Walz's overarching frame was make Minnesota the best state in which to raise. And there was an ambitious agenda we just heard, and she got out of breath, Doran run through. Paid leave, child tax credit, universal free lunch, increases the budget for childcare, new Department of Children and Families, and so much more. Talk to us about how you developed that agenda and built support for it through the governor's first term. And how did you build the support among relevant agencies as well, in terms of partnerships, thinking about implementation of the policies? What do we need to know?
Well, thank you. And I just want to say thanks for having me and also for accommodating my need to be virtual this morning. It's really great to be here today, and in particular with all of our really incredible Minnesota partners who are there with you in person, who we really worked hand in glove with over years, as Doran and Chair Olson described, to really be able to accomplish all of the things that we did this session together. And I'll say the framing and the context that both Doran and Chair Olson provided, I think is really helpful and is something I'm going to underscore here through my comments. And I'll also say as well that every time I hear any sort of listing of all of the things we did, it just always like gives me so much pride and also so much pause to just like really soak in all of the things that we did together in this session that built off of all of the years of work. It was just truly a momentous session. So before Governor Walz started his career in public service as an elected official, he was a longtime middle school social studies teacher and a football coach in Mankato, Minnesota. And so his time in the classroom really gave him a lens into the lives of hundreds of kids throughout his time as a teacher, and really drove his view on policymaking. And so the governor talks a lot about how teachers that would pool money together to make sure kids could eat lunch at school. He watched kids with learning disabilities struggle in the classroom. He saw firsthand how problems at home crept into school. And so he understands at a really very personal level the myriad of struggles that kids face. And importantly, he's keenly aware that helping kids means helping their families. And so when Tim Walz won his race for governor in 2018, that background of being a teacher and a coach and of helping kids is really what he brought into the work with him. And so when he came into office in 2019, he laid out a vision for his administration of making Minnesota the best state in the nation to raise a family. And he's been laser focused on that goal ever since. So fast forwarding here to the 2023 session, as Doran and Chair Olson both so eloquently talked about, the table was really set to launch as a launching pad for all the work we were going to be doing together with the folks here in the room. The governor had been talking about and running on policies that improve the lives of Minnesotans for years. And those policies and the messaging that the values-based messaging that Chair Olson talked about overlapped also with the priorities coming out of the Minnesota Values Project table. Those projects and that messaging was then amplified by allies, by DFL legislators, and then of course by the governor himself over the last 4 years of the governor's first term, and as Doran noted, even prior to the governor coming into office. And so we had a really strong inside-outside game that had already been established, and we were all collectively working together to take advantage of the electoral opportunity that we were given in 2022. And as Doran already noted in those all of the lists of accomplishments here, we really did take advantage of it. So when the governor won re-election last year, he continued to lay out the same vision he's been talking about making Minnesota the best state in the nation to raise a family. And I think what's different about this time is that the public was listening in a new way, because now we had this trifecta, and after years of divided government and gridlock, we could actually get a lot of this done. And so when the governor laid out that vision again, and when he gave examples in his speech of what it actually meant to him to make Minnesota the best state in the nation to raise a family, he talked about passing paid family medical leave. He talked about creating a first in the nation child tax credit that will reduce child poverty by 30%, universal meals, generational investments in childcare and education, and a new state agency that would focus on kids. And again, those are the same policies that the governor had been talking about, and legislators and MVP and allies. We've been talking about that for years, but this time people really took note. And like I said, together with everyone around the table and in the room with you all, we pretty much accomplished everything that the governor outlined in that inaugural address in January of 2023. And so I'll just end too by saying, this was sort of touched on a bit as well, that it took years of work, relationship building, and also just committed leaders at all levels and in all spaces to get done what Minnesota got done this year. I'll just also just note and kind of end by saying as well that the Friday after the election, when we knew we had a trifecta, the governor, the Speaker of the House, Melissa Hortman, and Senate Majority Leader Carrie Dietzich met that Friday, so a few days afterwards, and really talked about what these next 2 years under a guaranteed trifecta would mean. And that those group of leaders, not only did they commit to not letting the moment pass them by, we actually filled out we did like a wish list, a dream list that filled a legal size sheet of paper of all of the policies that those leaders wanted to pass in 2 years. And again, those policies had been worked and vetted and talked about and messaged through the MVP table and through the legislature and the dry run in the House for the previous numbers of years. Those were all ready to go. And at the end of the day, we knew that we also had that strong, well-oiled machine of partners behind us. And at the end of the day, we got together with partners and legislative allies, we got every single thing on that legal size piece of paper done in 1 year. So it was just really just a deep privilege to do it with everyone here in that room, and just greatly appreciate the question and the opportunity to talk about our great session here.
Thank you, Leah. President Burnham, I want to bring you into the conversation and pick up where Leah just left off about the years of the work, the unseen work that went into building relationships across different silos, organizational silos, issue silos. So from a workers' rights perspective and a labor perspective, talk to us about how you build those relationships. Because I can imagine there's the immigrant rights agenda and the racial justice agenda and the workers' rights agenda and the children's agenda. How did you all figure out how to not be divided by the competition between those issues and to actually get it all done? And specifically, what does it mean for workers in the state?
Well, thank you for the question. Well, I can tell you, I've been in my role just a little over 1.5 years now. And so when I came in, there were things that needed to be addressed, across our unions in the state of Minnesota. And a lot of the work that we did in the first year was about building solidarity and really bringing people to the table. We haven't had a chance to talk to each other over the course of COVID. People were in silos essentially, right? And so there was lots of misunderstandings. There were things that people didn't like about what other unions did. And so it was a task, but we've come a long way. And I'm proud of the work that we've done with labor in the state of Minnesota and just having people listen to one another. That's what a lot of this is about, right? It's hearing about your differences. It's understanding what it means to every single affiliate in the state of Minnesota. What's important to you? What are the things we can do together? What's the bottom line for labor? What is it to be a union member in the state of Minnesota? And so those were the conversations that we had and we continue to have. And we have a great Justice Committee that's doing some work. As a matter of fact, today, and you've heard a lot of us are jetting back. I'm going to an afternoon panel later today where we're talking about public safety and talking to labor leaders and why is that important to our communities? You heard Governor Walz is a teacher. I'm a teacher. I'm an elementary teacher. So for me, the foundation of my work is around children and communities and families. And so I bring that to our labor table. And we have I'll tell you, the person who sat at MVP is Bethany Winkle. She's our executive director. Amazing. I am so fortunate to work with her as all of these folks every day. So, and then, you know, what we do is we get our groups together, our affiliates together and talk about our legislative agenda. What's important to us? We knew the paid family medical leave was number one. Were there some differences around that? You bet. But we came to a place of understanding and brought examples of other states where that have worked for everybody and had those conversations. So I think, you know, trying to get us out of our silos after 2 years of not being able to be together was a really big deal. And we continue to push that forward. While this work is amazing, and I'm like everybody else, every time I hear the list, I mean, I just get chills, you know, it's pretty amazing. And we celebrate and share about the wonderful things. And there is not an affiliate in the state of Minnesota that's not touched by some piece of legislation this year. That also means there's not anyone in the state of Minnesota that isn't touched by the legislation. You know, when things work well for labor, things work well for everybody. So I think that's important. And you know, we need to be at the table and we know there's a lot more work to be done. While Liz said, you know, the Minnesota miracle is not so much a miracle as a lot of years of hard work. There's lots of years of hard work moving forward, and we will work to continue to try to be together, identify the people who are going to do what's best for Minnesota. And that's part of our job too, is to make sure that those folks get elected. And we're there at the table and we will continue to be at the table and work together in coalition because we know it's what's best for children and families and communities.
Thank you, Bernie. And I say Bernie because folks in this town need to know there's another badass Bernie around. Amelia, I want to get you into the conversation. And President Burnham just mentioned every time you hear the list, it's chills. So talk to us about immigrant inclusion this legislative session, and to give you a snapshot of that list: driver's license for immigrants, immigrant inclusion in healthcare, immigrant inclusion in child tax credit. That is not even conceivable here at the federal level in this moment. So talk to us about how you built the coalition and built the political will and support and power to get this done, and what lessons did you offer other states?
Absolutely. Sorry about that. Can you guys hear me? Thank you so much. I think, as we're getting the chills of that list, I want to name that photo back there, 100% of Olsen. That's members with like real names and addresses and issues and stories that filled the Minnesota State Capitol with that reality and brought so much intentionality and power and motivation to every single member of that chamber. And that event was particularly incredible because there were so many, as Doran said, abundant omnibuses that we had to go to the front yard to have the governor just sign a bunch of them in front of a big broad coalition. So that was the photo, that when that photo happened. And going back to the question, that is the way that I see that coalition. it's that moment signing so many different omnibus bills and like the last stretch of the session where we had life-changing labor provisions and life-changing healthcare provisions. And going back, we remember the last time we had a trifecta in which Senator Smith mentioned that we were in the trenches when that trifecta was not motivated enough to deliver driver's licenses for all, including other things. And we took responsibility as immigrants, as folks that cannot vote, that still we haven't found a path to pass a comprehensive immigration reform. We took the responsibility to build the conditions in which our things will not be a second thought. We did that by building independent political power. We opened entities and PACs and super PACs and developed the largest political operation predominantly led by immigrants and non-voters. If we were talking to voters about, well, you know and love someone who cannot vote, how are you gonna show up publicly to make sure that there's an agenda that includes all of us? The second thing we did is we defined who's us. We defined who's Minnesotans. And we did that with narrative. We talked about immigrants, we talked about refugees, we talked about moms, GBLTQ folks, trans folks, and we decided to name that this is us, no exceptions. And I think an important political moment was the crisis that we faced during the Trump administration and Trumpism. Crisis reveals us. Crisis revealed who we are. And we faced Democrats with a choice. Are you going to be a pro-immigrant Democrat? Or are you going to go and hide in inaction and allow all these atrocities to happen while you were in power? And what are you gonna do about that? It was not just anecdotal. We held elected officials accountable to that standard in the most critical moments of the legislative session. That also happened when we had a minority in the Senate. We had a Republican Senate, Democrat Governor Dayton, and a majority in the House. And driver's license received a second pushback. It could be, in the past, before 2018, driver's licenses could have been fixed by administrative relief. It was a sign of an executive plan. And in that session, Governor Dayton decided through some of the last minute negotiations to eliminate that power from the administrative office and leave all that only through a legislative path. And we held them accountable. And we held the party accountable by boycotting one of the largest fundraisers in the history of Minnesota. And we did that with our friends. We asked our friends. We asked labor. We asked Faith in Minnesota. We asked teachers. We asked nurses. Who is us? It's like Martin Luther King said, in the face of crisis, you don't remember the attacks of your enemies or the silence of your friends, something along those lines. So we asked our friends, what's the us we are defending? And how are we gonna make this clear as we're building the progressive path in the state? I believe that changed the cultural memory, the cellular memory of the party. Because after that, we banded together with labor, Faith in Minnesota, and many organizations to transform the caucus process and include formerly incarcerated folks and undocumented immigrants.
In the endorsing process of the party.
In the endorsing process of the party. Yes, it's caucus is Midwest. I know, it's a very Minnesota thing too. So caucus means that undocumented folks and formerly incarcerated folks can register as Democrats and hold a vote and be elected as delegates to decide who's gonna be the endorsed candidate, who is gonna run in the primary. It's political power. And finally, we co-govern inside and outside. We sat on the Minnesota Values Project. We worked with tons of aides, and I want to send a special shout out to Paul Cummins, who is one of the aides of the Minnesota House, who is co-governing operative. That gets a lot of the work done, writing papers and funding research and running across the chamber, getting the work done on behalf of Minnesotans across the state. And by co-governing and not giving up until the last breath, there were moments where we didn't know if there were some provisions that we were gonna get through the finish line. And we didn't stop organizing until our stuff was signed. And we're still processing, and we are still evaluating what could have done better, what are we gonna do? We're working on implementation. And at the root is good organizing. It is building independent political power. And it's getting the notion that it doesn't matter whether you can or cannot vote. You can still organize, you can still have power, and you can band with others, hold folks accountable, and get your work done.
Thank you, Amelia. Give it up for Amelia, please. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. I have two more questions. We're gonna make this a speed round.
Speed round, all right.
Speed round, because we wanna hear from a friend and colleague, some of her reflections on what she's heard, and then we wanna get to your questions. So if you're on Zoom, start clicking in the chat. If you're here in the room, I and Tatiana soon will come around with a microphone for you to ask questions here. So here's a speed round for everybody. Question one. We are celebrating you. This is a beautiful kumbaya moment, and I also know you're human and humans are better. So talk to us about the challenges. It's just hard. So is there, talk to us about a hard thing you had to navigate or manage, because coalitions are hard, solidarity is hard, it takes practice. We're not born knowing how to be in an alliance all the time. So talk to us, Amelia. I'm gonna start with you. We can go down the line and come to you, Leah, as well. You know, in a minute or two or less. Talk to us about a hard thing you had to navigate.
I think there's two very hard things that we had to navigate. One was how our internalized oppression shows up in coalition work, and how we have to make decisions, and we have to support people from understanding that leadership does not mean control, and what does it mean to have and be accountable to a membership that is autonomous. But that's only a piece of the puzzle. We have to have boundaries when other organizations might want the same thing, but they might not think that's the right path. And how do we respect that and honor that and see folks with their righteous birthright to organize in the way that they make decisions about that. That in the way we spend a good amount of time trying to navigate those dynamics. And we have a lot of lessons learned from that. The other dynamic is the deficit base. When deficit shows up in your when deficit shows up everywhere, from the elected official to the operative to the organizers, when we get scared or afraid that we've never have gone through this frontier, and what if it's not enough? What if we are going to balloon the budget? What if we're gonna get like our financial statements unbalanced? What if? And just being very clear that what if, we know what ifs. We know the story of what happened when we didn't get state legislation done. And somebody came to attack GBLTQ folks, immigrant folks, trans folks, working class folks, unionized labor. We don't have to imagine what's the cost of that, unfortunately, anymore. We are very clear of the reach of the people that are against us. And that is the reminder, the continuous reminder that we don't do things courageously to protect our democracy for everyone, no exceptions. We know what is the cost, and there's people who believe that cost, and that cost is what remains at the center. The people's integrity, people's lives is what has to be reminded that's at the center.
Doran?
I think this is working.
Building independent political power, meaning contesting for power in the party, in election cycles, or around an agenda that you demand that people support, creates change, which creates significant controversy and tension. When Faith in Minnesota had 10% of the state delegates in the endorsing convention of 2018, and then we had thousands of people, including undocumented and formerly incarcerated people, in endorsement processes, that created a lot of tension. But that tension was necessary to get to the point that we had the kind of shared power that we needed and the people in the legislature that we needed to win.
Echo everything that was said. I would also say internally, when you have a Democrat governor, a Democrat controlled Senate, Democrat controlled House, it's, you know, we no longer have the Republican enemy that we had to figure out how we stay unified, because when we are unified, we are strongest and we are best. That didn't mean we didn't have an immense amount of tension internally, but figuring out that was a change for me, and understanding is like when you don't have anything Republican to deal with, you become your own points of tension and your own enemies at times. So how do you navigate that? I think internally, our caucuses and we're teaming with the governor to stay unified throughout was really critical and hard.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, as you know, in the House of Labor, there are differences. It's how do you pull everybody together and hold them together without going after each other, right? So towards the end of session, there was a big bill that was going through, that the nurses wanted, and, I would say that, Mayo kind of held the state of Minnesota hostage. I'm just gonna say that up front. Corporate interests will easily divide people. And we saw evidence of that, and I can tell you that there was at least one Saturday afternoon when I was not there, and we were all in our own places at home with our families and stuff, that we spent on the phone trying to keep two of our affiliates, well, two or more affiliates from, you know, really going after each other and staying together. So there's a lot of background work and behind the scenes that nobody knows, but it is a struggle, I think, with corporate interests when they come after all of our states. And it's a question that I've posed to the Midwest leaders of the AFL-CIO, and nobody seems to have an answer at this point. I think it's something that we need to continue to work on. So yeah, it's interesting when you are the one in the middle and trying to hold people together without breaking down. So we did okay.
Leah, from where you sit, how did you answer this question?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I agree with everything that's been said, and building off of what Chair Olson mentioned too about the transition from having a Republican control of one legislative body and now having a trifecta, and then there's sort of not that common entity we can point to and staying unified. Taking that a bit of a step further, I think one of the challenges as well was that transition from working on all the policies over the last number of years that the House was passing year after year, like paid family leave, for example, was passed numerous times prior to 2023 in the House, but it was of course stymied in our Republican Senate. That transition from passing these bills that we knew would run into a wall to now in a trifecta, passing them in a way that is making sure that works. You know, it's kind of takes that extra level of consideration and discussion and bringing folks together to make sure we're passing something that is not only in the best interest of Minnesotans, but that can clearly work for state government to stand up. Because if it fails, for example, that then is on all of us. And so that transition from moving the same bills that we all are running on, that we're all lifting up, that we're wanting to pass, and then when we know they wouldn't, to when we know they will, and we have the commitment to do it. I think that was a challenge, but also was, I think we were able to overcome that because of all the work and relationship building that had been done over the course of the previous years.
Leah, I want to stay with you for the final question, and then we'll come back this direction with Bernie, Chair Olson, et cetera. What's one lesson you want to offer us for folks trying to learn from Minnesota?
Was that a question to me first?
Yes, to you first.
Okay. I think I would say two quick things. relationships matter. I think that would be the one thing I would say. Relationships matter, coordination matters, and partnerships matter. And that all then, of course, comes back to the partnerships and having those conversations behind closed doors, getting to know one another, and coalescing around shared values that can drive the other things forward. And all of that needs to work together, but is based on those relationships that you're honing over years. So I would say relationships.
Exactly what I was gonna say, Leah. Relationships matter and the work is hard and people need to understand that everything that happens politically impacts every single one of us. As a teacher, I can't tell you how many teachers don't think it's important to be active politically. And they work hard every day, right? And they're exhausted. But everything that happens in their classroom, and we see it all the time, right now, in our classrooms, in our schools and communities, politics impacts what we do. And so we've got to be at the table. We have to be part of the voice. And yeah, relationships.
Ditto the relationships. I would say one thing we learned from other trifecta states that went before us is they weren't ready. Be ready. Well before you have the ability to get ready. The next one was always stay grounded in the people you represent or the people your organization, like, and we heard from leaders in the 2013 trifecta, which you heard a little bit about, you regret the things you don't get done, not the things you do. And so do the things. And then we also heard, do the right thing every day, the most good for the most people you can, and the election will take care of itself. And so don't get hung up on the next election, get hung up on doing the most good you can do with the power you have now. And the rest will take care of itself.
A lot, I was reading some for those of you who may move resources or, but a lot of resources get moved around the tactical winning of elections. But what would it look like to design our states and our progressive infrastructure around what it takes to govern? It's a very different set of questions.
I think I don't have any more words. I think everything has been said. When I compare to immigrant organizers, like we're not elected officials. We cannot be we cannot run for office. I think it's like we have proven that we are courageous. We have proven that we can organize and we can get work done. I think it's important that as we continue to build more power towards our North Star for permanent protection for as many immigrants as we possibly can, we have to remind ourselves that these relationships are power relationships. They are power relationships in the public arena. We, as much as we care about elected officials, we are accountable to our base. We are accountable to these immigrants. And that's at the center of our work. Just sending a lot of love for people in Michigan. I know they're very short on votes, so if you can support Michigan folks right now, they need like less than 5 votes to get driver's license done. So please support, show up for Michigan and for Michigan elected officers. This is your legacy. We will remember you for what you did, not for the regrets that you have after the legislative session is over.
Thank you. Can we give our Minnesota comrade? We're gonna go to Q&A, but 2 things first. One, it's not lost on me the gender dynamics of conversation. It's not an accident.
It's not an accident, no.
And second, I do want to invite up a special guest, Ashley Dwyer from SEIU, who is the Director of State and Local Programs, to offer some reflections on the national implications of what we've just heard from these amazing organizers and leaders.
Sorry, I didn't get my hug in with Doran before. So thank you. First, I wanted to give my respects and best from our Minnesota team. They are back home kicking butt right now, ensuring implementation is happening on all the amazing worker rights pieces. And also today is the first meeting of the first National Nursing Home Standards Board. So national implications, I mean, everything you all said, just times it by 50.
Yeah.
I mean, that is an implication. I think we're seeing it play out right now in Michigan, trying to get everything they can, for worker rights, in the time that they have left this session. But I'm feeling particularly right now, what Doran was saying at the end about the, independent political, and strategy, that we should be orienting more towards what it takes to govern than win elections. And that is so real right now. Just next door in Virginia, we're having elections to take back the House and secure the Senate against, quite frankly, a fascist House and governor. And so we have to do what you all have been doing for years, which is pass these policies, lob them back to this governor, and show what an anti-community, anti-worker governor he is, so we can rebuild that power and security, and then move forward. Yeah, go ahead. So I think, we're taking a lot of time with our team, to really dig in and talk about what were the key pieces, what were best practices. I'm definitely intrigued on hearing more about the MVP from our team and also you all to see how we could replicate that in other states, because I think leading with values is like the core. Like, people don't turn out to vote because you tell them this person has a blue check mark, to turn out to vote because issues impact them in their day in, day out life. And so however we can do that together and expand that across all of our states, I really look forward to.
Thank you. So there are some questions. I can take a few from here. Tatiana has the microphone. I think Maya has one too. You can of course be as brief as possible, so we can collect a few for our friends to answer. That'd be great.
I don't have any questions, more words of appreciation. I want to say thank you for just all your words of wisdom and learning how you all do what you did in Minnesota and organizing the way that you all did. It's inspiration to me. My name is Asia Williams. I'm an organizer here in DC. And as someone who was very early on in my organizing career, all your words of wisdom have really resonated, and thank you.
One or two more, and then Vic, I'm going to come to you.
Well, I'd just like to follow up on Doran's last point about how, push a little harder on the resource question. How would it look different if resources were focused on building, on governing rather than just short-term things about election?
Well, why don't you answer that? I think that's a fun question to answer right now, and then I'm gonna come to you, Vic, because there's some questions I know. There are about 40 people online on Zoom, so we want to get some other questions in too.
I could probably write like a PhD paper on what would be different. But there's like a couple of headlines. So, oftentimes our electoral system is built on metrics of scale that have to do with paid activity or paid tactics. So how many doors get knocked, how many texts get sent, how many digital ads get bought. It's like and that is not asking the question, how much power was built and how much impact is that having in terms of power. So the trajectory, for example, of Unidos Minnesota's power, independent political power in the state of Minnesota, in not just in one or two places, but in critical districts, Senate districts, and House districts, and in the governor's race across the state, and their ability then to deliver hundreds of people into the legislative process is a piece of a central, ongoing, people-driven infrastructure in the state. So obviously they play a role in elections, but the capacity that's required to ensure that in you know, Rochester, when there's a real fight about what kind of paid family leave bill is gonna happen, or whether or not immigrants are gonna be included in the healthcare public option, there are people on the ground then aligned with the hundreds of people that Faith in Minnesota have on the ground in Rochester, who are meeting then weekly with our Senator Liz Bolden in that place. That is very behind the scenes, and I'm not saying you should take, I don't know, all the $1 billion that are spent on the election and fund that. But there should be a question every step of the way. What is the infrastructure in Michigan now that is required? Because electing the trifecta isn't quite enough. It's a necessary but insufficient condition. Secondly, I would say, what resources does a new legislator need to effectively govern in a district? What networks of support, what infrastructure, what auxiliary capacities have to be in place for people, like especially as Ilhan was talking about, people who reflect our communities, who actually get into office? What operation needs to be a surround sound around those people in order for them to not only deliver what we want them to deliver, but be supported and grow in their leadership as they're like in a trajectory in a state? We need to think about all those things when we're thinking about moving resources.
Thanks, Doran. Okay, Dick. As I think 3 or 4 questions teed up from the Zoom. So I'm gonna give you my microphone, and if you can share those, and then to our illustrious panel, you can respond to any of these.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Yes. All right, so we have, yeah, tons of great questions from the chat. A question from Barbara, is what, if any, was the role of philanthropy in this long-term effort? Someone is interested in hearing more about the role that local unions and worker centers played in setting the legislative agenda and mobilizing to secure the trifecta. And Joy wants to know, how do we build more of a culture that can hold healthy tension in other places? What was the journey to that in Minnesota?
That's great.
Let's actually do the worker center. I think that's really important.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that, you know, worker centers and also labor as a whole. What we do is we pay attention to who's running. We try to get union members running. We try to get good candidates to run for office. Then we do really highly targeted campaigns with them, and door knock and phone bank and all of those things. So our support comes in the form of people power, getting out on the doors, making the phone calls, doing the texts and all of those things. And also continually looking for good candidates who can run for office at the city council level, school board level, state level, and now we're gonna move into national as well. So it's a constant looking for people who are going to represent the people of Minnesota the best, and who are going to speak up and do the work that's important to them. So it is people power and always being aware and present in what's happening in our communities.
Sure, Olson, do you want to take any of those?
There was the land attention. You want to take one? Take that.
I'll take it. So I think what we learned, so we started this MVP table, which started, you know, now we probably have 50 people that attend these meetings and are deeply committed and do work in work groups and all of this stuff. And it's broader than just that, but it's a deep commitment. But we realized at times there aren't places you get to hold big tensions in spaces like that. So we went through the pandemic, we went through the murder of George Floyd, we went through divided government. And we found oftentimes we would do our monthly meeting in the MVP table. And we realized, oh, this is the space, because this is the only space where we have legislators, leaders, organizations that needed to come together to talk about the tension to do that work. And you have to create spaces that are safe and have places where people have trust with each other, to be able to have that places where the tension is, and it oftentimes had nothing to do with MVP. It was just these tensions around Minnesota politics. But because there was no space that we had created quite like that, we had to learn how to hold that tension, but we also had the relationships that we were building towards this outcome, this beautiful policy agenda, that we knew we were all committed to that bigger thing so that we could hold that tension, and we've done the relational work. But it was multiple layers of places to be able to hold that tension, even when it wasn't ours to hold. We would do it, but it was rooted again in just our relationships with each other and belief we were trying to get to that bigger goal together, was really important. And I think if we wouldn't have had a space like that, a lot of those tensions may have actually imploded our ability to do that work. And so those weren't pleasant times to be in those spaces together, but they were necessary, to be able to then get to where we are.
Let's go to Leah. I'm gonna let you go last.
Oh,
Let's go to Leah to answer any of those, and then yes, one of you left will answer that philanthropic question. Leah, do you want to respond to any of those questions on the table?
Audio's a little bad. I think that went to me, but I would just reiterate what Chair Olson just said. I think those spaces were really important. And one other kind of layer of that too is I think there was a collective commitment, because there was that space available through the MVP table in particular, that those conversations stayed internal. Like you didn't really see it spill out like onto social media or any other like more public facing way. And so I think that was also really helpful. And again, that was because we had collectively done all the relationship work and had been working together and kept focused on the values and the mission moving forward. So I think that was.
Thanks, Leah. Amelia and then Doran.
So philanthropic question, I mean, if we look at the great scheme of, philanthropy dollars that go to service versus the philanthropic dollars that go to organizing, we have a very small margin of dollars that actually go into transforming conditions so that people have self-autonomy and determination beyond just surviving. So I think we have a shared responsibility with national, like most of Anita's funding comes from national networks and a few of the state Minnesota philanthropy partners. Minnesota is known as the land of 10,000 lakes and also 10,000 nonprofits. We are definitely not part of the complex in the state. So we have a short project with labor, in which we're partnering with labor to be able to pursue more local philanthropy into investing in our partnership with labor organizations. And in a specific, the northeast area of the state is not quite as diverse. There is reservations of indigenous peoples of Minnesota. And besides that, it's also like not that populated, but also it's not very diverse. So we don't have a base in northeast areas. And having a partnership with labor and a specific trade labor unions was incredibly important to be able to pass a standalone bill, for example, on driver's licenses. So like the AFL-CIO was critical to make sure that we were shifting local narrative in areas like Duluth and Moorhead. The carpenters, for the first time, the carpenters union provided a letter of support and actually put political power into making sure that all their friends who are labor champions also know that construction, like immigrants, are overrepresented in construction jobs, and many who are not organized through labor unions and whose salary is decimated by misclassification. So there's an alignment between the destiny of the carpenters union and the destiny of construction workers who need better conditions in order to not die at the job. So all those realizations come when we have strong spaces. So like it is safe space, but it's actually a strong space where we wrestle with the actual complexities of what is to actually build independent, contestable political power together.
Okay, I'll close. One message for organizers and one message for everybody, and I'll sort of hit on the philanthropy question. So for organizers, in our movements, we sometimes and I'm not talking about yourself as an organizer, but with leaders, like with the kinds of organizations that we're building. We can have a bit of an addiction to protest. And we sometimes feel better on the outside than we do on the inside. But the responsibility that we have to take is how do we prepare ourselves, not just as people who are staff, but as all of our leaders and members in our organizations to take responsibility for governing and wielding power. And if you take responsibility for governing and wielding power, A, it actually is pretty fun, okay? And B, you get to forge relationships, like with each other, but also with amazing leaders like Leah Montgomery and Representative Liz Olson and countless others to actually be with your sleeves rolled up, trying to solve problems. So how do we prepare ourselves for that? And then to my philanthropy friends, I'll underscore everything that Amelia said, but the way things happen is by moving power. It's not data or issue silos or stuff like that, okay? So it is time to understand more what kind of power is required to create a moment like what happened in Minnesota in 2023. And go to a state capitol and talk to a legislator. Go to a city hall, ask how things happen. And that will say a lot about how you want to get childcare done, or earn sick and safe time done, or paid family leave done, or immigrant justice, or police accountability, et cetera, et cetera. Go ahead.
Ooh, yeah, sorry. So I'm gonna close with just three things. First, just to say, this is the last public event I'm doing before I go out on paid parental leave.
Thank you.
I would like to say that this story, these issues hit me very emotionally, and it makes me angry for what's happening in this town right now, and what we're heading towards in terms of the government shutdown, the lack of the throwing back of kids into poverty, as we learned earlier this week. So thank you, because you've offered some inspiration and a strategy in the midst of despair for some of us. So thank you, because it's fed my soul today. Second, thanks to Community Change Action team and staff for getting us here and organizing this, to St. Mark's for hosting us. And I have to point out, as we're celebrating the Minnesota story, I'm going to stop talking about miracles. The Minnesota story. I do have to say, in 2 weeks at Community Change Action, we'll be celebrating some other organizers in a key state in Mexico who won a guarantee for childcare for every kid in that state. Find more information online, community.org. Okay. So last but not least, I want you to join me in thanking this esteemed panel. Thank you again, Leah, for joining us from afar. We're very close nonetheless. Thank you, President Burnham. Thank you, Chair Olson. Thank you, Doran. Thank you, Amelia. And I hope all of you are taking away some vital strategic lessons on how to build power, what it takes, and fundamentally on how to change lives. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for the work you do and for keeping the North Star alive for the rest of us around the country. Give it up for our panel.